Lena Petrova was holding 3 color-coded tablets, a physical notepad with no fewer than 7 subsections, and what appeared to be a formal grievance constructed entirely of office supplies, when Julian Thorne realized he was probably going to fall in love with her, which was extremely inconvenient timing, given that they were in hour 4 of a housing crisis that threatened to crater the entire merger. The grievance was a masterpiece. She'd used paper clips as bullet points, a ruler as a section divider, and what appeared to be a sticky note shaped like a skull that he was fairly sure she'd confiscated from Dmitri. It was filed under structural incompetence, alpha adjacent, and it was, technically, about him.
"The northern complex cannot support that density," she said, not looking up from the spreadsheet that was currently projecting 3 different scenarios across 5 different probability outcomes. "I've already modeled it. The water pressure cascades, the irrigation system fails. Dmitri would have to tap the southern line, which means the nursery shrinks or we bankrupt ourselves on infrastructure." "We're not asking it to support," Julian started. "We're not asking it to support," Julian started.
"Yes, you are. Your approved spec, signed off at midnight, which means you didn't run it past anyone who could have caught this." Lena finally looked up, and her expression had that surgical precision that meant she was genuinely trying not to be angry, and it was costing her visible effort. "Which is interesting, because you've been very careful about running things past people since Marcus. So either you made a mistake, or you're testing me. Both are problems." His wolf made a small, approving sound, the kind of sound reserved for people who respected the actual shape of a problem, instead of just the shape of your feelings about it. But underneath that approval was something else, an acute awareness of her. The specific cedar and stone scent of her, sharpened now with adrenaline and frustration. That scent had become a problem, a very specific, very distracting problem. "She respects the truth more than your ego," his wolf observed. "That might be why you keep staring at her mouth when she's yelling at you. Which is, by the way, extremely obvious and moderately embarrassing." "I'm not staring at her mouth." "You are absolutely staring at her mouth. You've been doing it for 11 minutes. I've been counting." Julian Thorne had been trained his entire life to be the person in the room who didn't flinch, who carried certainty like it was oxygen. He'd inherited the Ridgeback pack at 28 and been good at it. The pack had grown, the territory was stable. People looked at him with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your leader carries the weight without breaking. And then at 29, with one bad call, he'd learned that certainty was a luxury built on the bones of people like Marcus Reeves. "Housing density reverts," Julian said. "I'll send revised specs to your team by end of day. I was wrong." Lena didn't do victory laps. She just nodded and pulled the revised timeline toward her, already recalibrating the day's dominoes, her mind moving 3 steps ahead, because that was the only way she'd learned to move. She'd been 12 years old when her parents died, 12 years old when she suddenly became the backup system that kept her siblings alive, that kept the Black Fang pack from collapsing. Lists weren't management style for her. They were proof that nothing would slip, that no one would suffer because she didn't think hard enough. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. "Thank you," she said, and meant it in a way that made something shift in his chest. But it was more than that. When she looked up at him in that moment of acknowledgement, he caught it again, that scent, pure and clean and specifically her. It hit different when she was pleased. Less cedar, more something green and alive. His wolf wanted to catalog every variation of it, wanted to breathe it in until her emotional weather became readable as easily as his own packs. That want was becoming dangerous. "You're doing it again," his wolf said. "The mouth thing." Julian stopped doing the mouth thing. By week 3 of the merger, Dmitri cornered Julian in the logistics corridor with what appeared to be an organizational chart made entirely of office supplies, and at least one item that had been stolen from Lena's desk. "You're here again," Dmitri said, not even pretending to have a reason for blocking the hallway. "3rd time this week. And before you try the integration progress lie, I want you to know that the gossip network has formally convened. There was a quorum. Minutes were taken. Specifically, everyone has noticed that you show up wherever Lena is working, you stand around looking like someone's kicked your favorite wolf, and then you disappear before she acknowledges you exist. Julian, who had not expected to be called out by the Black Fang's resident chaos architect, just stared at him.
Don't look at me like that. I'm useful to the merger because I have no loyalty to either pack and absolutely no filter, Dimitri continued, moving his office supply chart to illustrate something incomprehensible. Which means I can say what everyone is thinking. You look miserable, she looks miserable, and the entire logistics wing is becoming increasingly organized as a coping mechanism. She's reorganized the supply chain contingency system 3 times this week. 3 times, Julian. The woman alphabetized things that were already alphabetical. That's not management. That's a cry for help. How is this your business? Julian asked. How is this your business? Julian asked. Everything is my business. I'm Dimitri. He said this as if it were a job title. Also, Phase 3 is complete, which means the squirrels are in the ventilation system now. She's going to have formal concerns. I have prepared a response to her formal concerns, which is this. He held up a piece of paper that contained a drawing of a squirrel wearing what appeared to be a tiny hard hat, underneath which was written, in very small letters, No. How many phases are there? Julian asked, despite himself. How many phases are there? Julian asked, despite himself. Classified. But I can tell you there are subphases, and they have subphases, and at least 2 of the subphases involve bioluminescence. You should probably figure out your situation before Phase 4, which is when I start weaponizing them. Dimitri leaned in conspiratorially. Also, she's started color-coding her color codes. That's a Lena severity level I've only seen once before, and that time, someone ended up relocated to a different territory. You might want to do something about this before she organizes you into a different pack. By week 4 of the merger, Julian had stopped pretending. He showed up everywhere Lena was for professional reasons. He was in the annexes on a Wednesday night when she was reviewing supply chain contingencies. Thursday morning when she worked through resource projections alone. Friday evening in a conference room that smelled like fluorescent lights and desperation. Watching her organize information the way some people organized bomb shelters, with the specific commitment of someone whose life had depended on systems working perfectly. She worked with focus that bordered on religious. No phone, no fidgeting. Just her and the problem space, until the problem gave up and became solved. His wolf found it hypnotic. But it was more than that now. Her scent filled the small conference room, warm beneath the fluorescent sterility, undertone of mint tea, and something underneath that was pure Lena. Focused, driven Lena. Frustrated Lena. His body had started tracking her without his permission, registering her proximity the way a wolf registered territory. You could just say it, Lena said one night, not looking up from her spreadsheet. They were alone in the annexes, which meant her wolf was close enough to the surface that Julian could feel it like ambient pressure. Instead of showing up and pretending to check on integration progress. I am checking on integration progress. I am checking on integration progress. You have a deputy who does nightly checks. You have reports. You have our Tuesday morning call. You have a weekly summary email that you specifically requested, which I know because I'm the one who writes it at 4 a.m, because apparently that's a thing I do now. Finally, she looked up, and Julian caught the shift in her scent, sharper now, something that read as nervous anticipation cut with exhaustion. She'd been awake since early, probably since before dawn, running herself ragged on 2 hours of sleep. You're not here for logistics. No, he admitted, I'm not. No, he admitted, I'm not. So why are you here? So why are you here? The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the ventilation system, There was a faintly luminescent squirrel that Dmitri had apparently decided was important enough to weaponize. But all Julian could focus on was the specific texture of her waiting, the way her hands had stilled on her tablet, the way her eyes had locked on his with an intensity that made his wolf want to close distance and never open it again. "You could answer her," his wolf suggested. "That's typically how conversations work. Someone asks a question, you form words, the words come out of your mouth. I can walk you through it if that's helpful." "There's a squirrel," Lena said, redirecting, her voice slightly hoarse in a way that suggested she'd been crying or on the edge of it. "In the vent above your head. It's also glowing. That's a Phase 4 Dmitri situation, which means we're approaching critical mass." "Is this a threat assessment or an aesthetic choice?" "Yes," Lena said. "Both." "Neither. I've filed 3 formal complaints. He responded to the first by creating a pie chart of my complaints using sticky notes. He responded to the second by leaving a glitter bomb in my inbox, which I'm still finding in my hair. He responded to the third one by creating a diagram made entirely of office supplies and what might be a threat. I honestly cannot tell. It had a skull on it. The skull had googly eyes." She finally looked at him, really looked, and there was something in her eyes that was trying very hard to be professional, and mostly just failing. Frustration, amusement, and underneath it, something that looked like she was actively tired of the distance between them. Her sense shifted again, the nervous edge sharpening, mixing with something warmer. Want. She was projecting want, and his wolf was responding to it like a howl to a howl. His wolf made a sound that was dangerously close to laughter. "This is it," his wolf said. "This is the moment you should do something about this instead of staring at her like a loading screen." "You should probably tell him the squirrels are affecting morale," Julian said. And he could hear the strain in his own voice now, the careful control required to stand 12 feet away from her, instead of closing the distance that had become its own form of torture. "I did, 3 times. He responded by filing a formal response that was technically a squirrel skull with question marks. The question marks may have been a threat. The skull definitely had googly eyes again. I'm starting to think he buys them in bulk." "That's probably the point." "That's probably the point." "That is absolutely the point," Lena agreed. "And the fact that I have to accept a googly-eyed squirrel skull as a legitimate business communication makes me question the entire merger's structural integrity." She paused, a small, dry smile playing at the corner of her mouth, and Julian found himself staring at that smile, at the specific shape of her lips, at the way a small scar on her lower left side caught the light. "You know what's funny? I have a contingency plan binder back in my office. 14 binders, actually. Contingency 14C is titled Unforeseen Alpha Emotional Crises. I made that section 6 months ago, before any of this, because I plan for everything. And I still have no idea what to do with you." "You have a contingency plan for alpha emotional crises?" Julian asked, which was absolutely not the point, and they both knew it. 17 pages of notes, a decision tree with branches for he's being difficult on purpose, and he's being difficult because he has unprocessed trauma, and a strongly worded section about how feelings are manageable if you organize them correctly. Lena looked back at her spreadsheet, but her shoulders had dropped slightly, the defensive posture easing. "Turns out feelings don't organize. They just sit in your chest and make you show up at work with your contingency plans, while the actual thing you need to plan for is standing in your office, looking like he's going to apologize for existing." "I'm not here to hurt you," Julian said quietly, and he meant it so completely it felt like a vow. "You're here because you want to be here," Lena said, not looking at him. "And that scares you more than the alternative. So you show up and then disappear, and think that's somehow better than just deciding. You know what's worse than letting someone into your orbit? Making them live in the space between your arrival and your exit, over and over again." She gathered her tablets with efficient movement. "You don't have to fix this tonight, but you can't keep doing it like this." She didn't lecture him. She didn't rage. She just stated the coordinates of the problem and walked away before he could respond, leaving Julian standing alone in the annexes with the weight of his own cowardice settling across his shoulders like an old coat he'd forgotten how to take off. The scent of her lingered in the air, fading, leaving him standing in an empty room, feeling like he'd just watched something necessary walk out the door. His wolf waited exactly 3 seconds before speaking. That went well. Shut up! No, really, tremendous work. She asked you a direct question, and you responded by standing very still and saying nothing. Groundbreaking emotional strategy. I'm going to write a formal grievance about this. It's going to have subsections. The joint pack run was supposed to be 15 minutes. A show of unity. A performance of confidence. Both packs gathering at the tree line at dusk, watching their leaders shift and run and return, learning that the merger was managed, was secure, was possible. The run lasted 18 minutes because Julian's wolf couldn't seem to help himself, and Lena's wolf apparently had opinions about that. You, her wolf said, a voice like dark water and absolute certainty. You're the one making her miserable. She tastes like exhaustion and effort and longing. She tastes like someone who's been holding herself together with spreadsheets and discipline, and waiting for someone who keeps walking away. I'm keeping her safe. Her wolf made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a growl, a noise that contained almost too much feeling, almost too much fury at the situation. You're keeping yourself safe, she corrected. You're a coward dressed up as careful. She's packed, she's competent, she's held herself and her siblings together for 12 years. She doesn't need you protecting her from yourself by disappearing. She needs you to actually be a person and deal with your trauma, instead of using it as an excuse. Julian's wolf tried to interject. Don't, her wolf said. Don't you dare defend him right now. I have been listening to him make sad wolf noises for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of pathetic whimpering. My human is losing sleep over his human's inability to form complete sentences in her presence, and I am personally offended by the quality of his pining. It's not even good pining. It's just standing and leaving, like a revolving door with abandonment issues. When they shifted back, Lena was pulling her clothes on with efficient movement. She was still breathing hard from the run, her chest flushed, and Julian realized she'd pushed herself deliberately, run hard, tested the limits, let her wolf have something close to freedom. The moment she saw him, something in her face shuddered, but then she paused, waited. Julian crossed the grass between them and stopped just close enough that if either of them moved, they'd be touching. This close, her scent was overwhelming, sweat and pine and that underlying current of her that he'd been tracking for weeks. His body wanted to react to that proximity. Everything in him wanted to close that distance. Your wolf, he started. I know what my wolf said. She's been very vocal about your performance. Lena's hands were shaking slightly. She used the phrase revolving door with abandonment issues. I want you to know I didn't approve that metaphor, but I'm not correcting it either. His mouth went dry. This was the moment. The one his wolf had been screaming about, the one where the distance either closed or became permanent. Julian reached out slowly, giving her time to step back, to move away, and took her hand. Her palm was warm, still flushed from the shift, and when his fingers curled around hers, he felt her wolf respond. A surge of something under the surface, a sound that was almost a whine. Her skin was soft, but the calluses across her knuckles spoke of work, of organizing, of decades spent doing things with her own strength. His thumb found the inside of her wrist, and he could feel her pulse there, rapid, racing. I'm not ready, he said quietly. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. But I'm done pretending I'm doing this for professional reasons. I'm done running. Lena looked at their hands. At the point where contact had become real, where the abstraction had turned into skin and warmth and the actual shape of what he was offering. Under the fragrance of her fear was something deeper. Want, sharp and immediate. "Don't do that," she said quietly, and her voice was unsteady now. "Don't stand here and promise me something you're going to panic about in 3 hours. I need you to actually think about this, instead of just reacting to the fact that my wolf made you feel guilty." "I have been thinking," Julian said. His fingers were still curled around her wrist, feeling her pulse spike when he spoke. "For 3 weeks. Every moment I'm not standing in front of you, I'm thinking about how much it costs me to leave. That's thinking." Lena squeezed his hand, not hard, just acknowledgement. The pressure of her fingers around his sent a small jolt through him, a reminder of what it felt like to be touched intentionally, wanted. Then she let go, stepped back, and the moment broke like glass. The absence of her hand in his was acute. "Come back when you're sure," she said. "Actually sure, not just scared into honesty sure. The real kind." She walked to where her pack was gathering, and Julian had to sit down on the earth, because his knees had apparently decided they were done with him. His wolf was making a sound like a whimper, but underneath it was something else, a small, determined note. Not resignation, acknowledgement. "She's right," his wolf said quietly, "and you know it." I know. "Good. Now stop sitting in the dirt like a tragic lawn ornament and go figure it out." The next week, Dmitri found Lena in the merged archives, reorganizing the contingency documentation system because apparently crisis prevention was her version of stress relief. "You've created 17 sub-indexes," Dmitri announced, appearing with what looked like a squirrel skull with googly eyes and a clipboard. "I've been tracking your organizational output as a biometric indicator of emotional distress. Week 1, normal filing. Week 2, aggressive alphabetization. Week 3, you reorganized things that were already organized and then reorganized them again using a different system. Week 4, you've invented a new filing taxonomy. Lena, you've created a taxonomy. That's not management, that's a dissertation. Is there a purpose to this observation, or are you just narrating my breakdown? Is there a purpose to this observation, or are you just narrating my breakdown? Lena asked, not looking up from the file she was reorganizing. Both. Also, I'm here to tell you something about your alpha problem, if you want to hear it. Dmitri sat on the edge of the archive table, swinging his legs like a man without a care in the world. The squirrels have taught me something. The chaos they cause is the exact same mechanism that keeps the ecosystem working. You need them to scatter seeds, to move things around, to prevent stagnation. But the system has to be strong enough to handle the chaos, otherwise it just collapses. Are you giving me relationship advice using squirrels as metaphor? Lena asked. I'm telling you that the system you've built, your organization, your plans, your contingencies, it's strong enough to handle chaos. It's strong enough to handle him. He's not going to break it, but he's also not going to fix himself until he decides that being in chaos with you is worth more than being safe alone. Dmitri stood up. Also, Phase 5 is now complete. Phase 6 involves territorial integration of the bioluminescent squirrels into the merged territories. I've named the lead squirrel Gerald. Gerald has opinions about the ventilation system. You named a squirrel Gerald. Gerald named himself. I merely recognized his authority. He's very charismatic for a rodent. Dmitri paused at the door. Phase 7 is theoretical. It involves feelings. I will keep you updated. He left, and Lena sat in the archive surrounded by files and her brand new filing taxonomy, and realized that Dmitri, in his roundabout way, had just told her something true. She also realized she'd reorganized the same drawer 4 times in the last hour, which meant the taxonomy was probably a cry for help. The Moon Petal Garden was technically off limits during merger week, but Lena had a key and no one was rude enough to ask why. She sat on the bench at 6:47 in the morning on Thursday, with 2 cups of tea and the bone-tired expression of someone who'd been awake since 3 in the morning. And she sat in the middle of the bench. 3 feet of space on the left, 3 feet of space on the right, as if she were waiting for someone. Julian found her there because he was increasingly finding her everywhere, and he was increasingly running out of excuses for it. Also, because he'd followed her from her quarters at 5:30 like a person with no self-preservation instincts, like a person who'd spent 4 years avoiding feeling anything, and had suddenly woken up to the realization that he was going to feel something no matter what he did. "You'll run cold," he said. "You'll run cold," he said, nodding at the second cup. "It's for you." She didn't look at him. "I figured you'd show up. You show up everywhere else. I considered making a spreadsheet tracking your appearances, but then I realized that would make me the creepy one, and this relationship already has enough problems." His wolf actually lurched in his chest. Oh, she made tea. She was waiting. She said this relationship. She said relationship. She said relationship, and you're going to stand there processing it like a broken calculator. Sit down. Julian sat down. He left the 3 feet of space between them at first. It had become its own geography, its own territory, close enough to hear each other, to catch each other's scent, far enough to maintain the fiction that this was still just professional. The garden smelled like stone and early morning and the specific green of growing things, but underneath all of it, he could detect the warm earthiness of her, tea-honey skin, something that made his wolf want to curl closer. "The housing complex has been bothering you." "The housing complex has been bothering you since you approved it," Lena said. "Not because it's wrong, but because you hate making calls." "Yes, yes. You made the right call. You made the right call." "I made a call that minimized visible failure," he said. "That's different." Lena finally looked at him, and her expression had that careful, precise quality it got when she was about to say something honest and it cost her effort. The kind of honesty that required her to put down her defenses for a moment and just exist in vulnerability. "My parents died thinking they were right by default," she said quietly. "They never second-guessed. They never checked. They were so certain they couldn't afford to be wrong that they got careless. And then they were very, very wrong. And everyone suffered." She paused, hands shaking slightly as she gripped her tea. "My brother almost died because they didn't verify a medication prescription. So second-guessing is actually a feature of good leadership. It means you learned from Marcus. You're not that person anymore." Julian didn't move, but he was aware of every inch. Julian didn't move, but he was aware of every inch of space between them, every 3 feet of it, every moment of proximity withheld. "The thing is," Lena continued, "I used to wake up at 3 in the morning, every night for 12 years. My brother's condition, the medication he needed, the logistics of keeping him alive. I'd wake up panicking, making lists, working through contingencies. And then," she trailed off, looking at her tea, watching the steam rise. "Week 2 of the merger. You stayed until midnight arguing with the procurement lead about a vulnerability in his model. You were right, by the way. It would have failed in Q3. But you stayed because I was there. And somewhere around 11:45, something in my chest settled. Like I'd been holding my breath for 12 years and suddenly remembered how to exhale." He remembered. He'd stayed because watching her work was like watching someone play chess at high speed, finding pattern in chaos. And because when she finally agreed he was right, when she looked up from her tablet and said, "You're right," something in his chest had shifted in a way that terrified him. "I didn't do that for you," he said. "I didn't do that for you," he said, but it was a lie, and they both knew it. "I know, but that's the problem." Lena's hands were shaking when she set the tea down. "You did it for me, but you won't actually stay. You keep closing the distance. and then the moment it means something, you pull away. You're here right now, and the moment this becomes about something other than work, you'll find a reason to leave. I can't, Julian started. Yes, you can. That's what's actually infuriating. You can. You just won't. Lena finally looked at him, really looked, and her expression was steady and furious, and underneath it, something that might have been heartbreak if she'd let it go that far. Either say the actual thing, Julian, or stop showing up. I can't keep doing this half measure where you're everywhere I am and then you're gone. His wolf was loud now, urgent, a sound like, tell her, tell her, tell her. Julian opened his mouth, closed it. Julian opened his mouth, closed it. Say the thing, say the thing. Julian opened his mouth again. Julian opened his mouth again. Use words. Words come out of the mouth. Use words. Words come out of the mouth. I have seen you do this before. When I was 29, he said quietly, I made a call. I was leading the Ridgeback pack, which I'd inherited at 28, which meant I was young and I was sure I was right. I gave an order in a situation I didn't fully understand. My best friend, his name was Marcus Reeves, he died following that order. It took him 3 hours. I remember the exact moment I gave the order. I remember the exact moment I realized I'd made a mistake. And I remember the space between those 3 moments, which is the rest of my life. Lena didn't move. Lena didn't move. After that, I stopped making calls, or I made them small and safe, and when there was any possibility I was wrong, I pulled away. His voice had gotten very quiet. So when you started being someone I actually cared about in a way that wasn't abstract, in a way that was real and specific and involved your actual safety, I couldn't do anything but pull away. Because keeping you safe meant not being the reason you weren't safe. And the only way I knew how to do that was to not be in your orbit at all. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Lena said, which was not the response he'd expected. I'm aware. No, like actually the dumbest. I say this as someone who once filed a contingency plan for the event of a squirrel-based infrastructure crisis, which is now a real thing that has actually happened. So I know dumb when I see it. You think I need to be protected from you making decisions? That's not protection, Julian. That's just you deciding you get to make choices for me without asking what I want. She stood up suddenly, agitated in a way he rarely saw. My parents died. My siblings nearly died, many times, because I made bad calls. And you know what I learned? That the people who deserve to have you in their orbit are the people you trust with your terrible decision-making, not the people you just fade out on because you're scared. His wolf made a sound that was almost like a whimper. Lena, I've spent every day of this merger watching you be brilliant and careful and genuinely thoughtful about what the pack needs. You made the right call on the housing complex. You make good calls now. You learn from Marcus. You're not that person anymore. She looked at him, and now her eyes were wet. And she was furious and sad, and underneath that something that looked like hope. And Julian's wolf was howling. So either sit down and have this conversation properly or leave, but don't do this half measure where you show up everywhere I am and then pretend it doesn't mean anything. Julian stood up. Lena's expression crumpled very slightly, and that was worse than anger. That was the moment his wolf reached his absolute breaking point. I'm not leaving, Julian said, and he heard his wolf in his voice, steady and furious and done. I'm standing up because if I don't, I'm going to lose my nerve again, and this needs to happen where you can hit me if I screw it up. Lena made a small, almost surprised sound. I care about you, Julian said, and it was simultaneously the hardest and easiest thing he'd ever said. in a way that terrifies me. You're competent and smart, and you've built your entire existence around making sure nothing breaks on your watch. And I'm a person who carries guilt like a structural load. But you're also the first thing I've wanted in years that didn't come with a disclaimer about how I'd probably ruin it. I've been waiting for you to realize that's not sustainable, that you deserve someone who stays. I want to be that person. I'm terrified I'm going to fuck it up, but I want to stay. His wolf was very quiet, the way things got quiet right before a storm. Her wolf says you're being dramatic, Lena said, and Julian blinked because that was such a specific thing to say, it could only mean one thing. You're shifted right now?
Partially?
He could see it now, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes caught light differently, the shift in her spine that was distinctly more wolf than human. Partial shifting meant she'd been here long enough to get frustrated enough to let the wolf close to the surface. She's been pacing for 3 days, Lena admitted. She has opinions about your performance in this whole situation, and none of them are charitable. Thank you, her wolf said, loud enough that Julian felt it in his bones, a voice like dark water and absolute certainty. Finally, some backbone. I have been filing formal complaints about this spineless performance for 3 weeks. I have a filing system. It has color-coded sections. Section 1, General Incompetence in Matters of the Heart. Section 2, Specific Instances of Cowardice, ranked by severity. Section 3, Propose remedial actions, including, but not limited to, using his words like a grown adult. She ignored all of them. But at least she has the decency to be angry about it now. Tell him about organizing spreadsheets at 2 a.m. because organizing things was the only way to make herself believe she could keep people alive. Tell him about how watching him walk away every single time has been eating her actual soul, and I am personally suffering for it. Tell him about the meditation logs she started keeping because she couldn't sleep anymore, about the way she checks on her siblings now, like she's still 12 and responsible for everything. This is the conversation she's been waiting for, and if he fumbles it, Section 4 is titled Nuclear Options, and it is not empty. Your wolf is very intense, Julian said, and Lena laughed, actually laughed, a gasping, shaky sound that broke something open in him that made the 3 feet of distance feel like the worst possible tragedy. She's been very intense about you for approximately 3 weeks, Lena said. She may have written a formal grievance with subheadings and a requirements section, and a strongly worded conclusion about your general competence in matters of human interaction. There's an appendix. The appendix has footnotes. Julian crossed the 3 feet of space in 2 strides. He didn't kiss her. That was the part that surprised both of them. Instead, he stopped just short of her, close enough that the warmth of his body brushed against hers. His hand came up slowly, his palm cradling her face, thumb settling on her cheekbone. Her skin was warm, slightly flushed from emotion and early morning. He could feel the fine bone structure beneath, could feel the shape of her, not abstract anymore, not distant. Real. Here. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice was rough. For being a coward. For making you ask for the thing you should have been able to have without asking. For every time I walked out instead of staying. Lena's breath caught at the contact, a small involuntary sound. She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing like she'd been holding them open on willpower alone. When she opened them again, there was something raw there, the shutters down, the walls open. I want to say something very mean to you right now, she said, but her voice was soft and she was leaning closer, close enough that he could smell the mint of her tea and beneath that the specific scent of her skin. About how you should have done this 3 weeks ago. You should, Julian said. Tell me something mean. I deserve it. You do, Lena agreed, but I'm going to show you mercy instead. And I'm absolutely going to regret that later, because I'm going to become insufferable about it. I'm going to bring it up in arguments for years. Remember when I could have been mean to you in the garden and I chose mercy? You owe me. She reached up, her hands finding his shirt, just gripping the fabric at his sides, not pulling, just holding on. Is this actually happening, or are you going to have another crisis about it in 3 hours? No more crises, Julian said. I'm done with crises. He kissed her then, and it wasn't careful or gentle. It was desperate and a little clumsy, 4 weeks of proximity and restraint giving way all at once. Her mouth was warm, and when he pressed in, she made a small sound into the kiss, a whimper that undid something in him. She tasted like tea and mint and something underneath that was purely her. His hand slid from her face to the back of her neck, fingers threading into her hair, and she pulled the fabric of his shirt tighter, climbing closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena rested her forehead against his, her hands still fisted in his shirt. No more disappearing, she said. It wasn't a question. No more disappearing, Julian confirmed. He could feel her heart racing where their bodies pressed together, could smell the shift in her scent, sharp now with arousal and satisfaction and want. Your wolf still thinks I'm dramatic? Both of them think you're dramatic, Lena said. She's already drafting a victory statement. It's going to be very detailed. She's threatening to file a formal notice titled, I Told You So, a comprehensive analysis, with approximately 30 question marks and an excessive number of caps locks.
There may be a pie chart.
They stood in the garden, with his hand at the back of her neck and hers in his shirt, neither of them moving, because moving would require doing something about the 3 feet of space that had become nothing, and they weren't ready for that yet. The morning grew around them, the sun climbing higher, the scent of the garden mixing with the scent of him, cedar, rain-wet stone, something clean and wild. The garden smelled like them now, like the specific alchemy of 2 people choosing each other. By week 5 of the merger, the first real crisis since the housing density situation emerged. A territorial dispute over water rights to a spring that technically belonged to Ridgeback territory but fed into Blackfang irrigation needs. It was the kind of problem that could fester, that could split the merger back open along exactly the lines they'd stitched together. Julian and Lena called a meeting in the neutral space, the merger war room with its maps and its probability models and its faint smell of coffee and overtime. The spring is technically Ridgeback, Lena said, laying out the territorial map with careful precision. But the hydrology is Blackfang dependent. If you restrict flow, you tank their irrigation system. If they tap it freely, you undermine water pressure to the northern complex. So we compromise, said Marcus, one of Julian's senior advisors, no relation to the Marcus who was gone. Lower flow rate for the north, managed extraction for the south. That solves neither system, Julian countered. The north still gets pressure cascades. The south still operates at limited capacity. Lena was already moving markers on the map, tracing a different path. What if we stop thinking about it as a conflict and think about it as a design problem?
The real constraint is that the spring is under Ridgeback jurisdiction, which means you can set conditions for access. But the real value is the water itself, not the control of it. Julian was watching her work, watching her think in 3 dimensions, while everyone else was thinking in 2. When she leaned across the table to adjust a marker, she was close enough that he caught her scent, warm and focused and alive with the energy of problem solving. His wolf recognized that scent, wanted it, wanted her. He settled a hand on the small of her back, ostensibly to move around the table. She stilled for a moment under his touch, her breath catching almost imperceptibly. Then she continued, and the casual intimacy of the gesture, the fact that she let him touch her in front of the whole room, the fact that he could, sent a small rush through him. You're suggesting a joint management structure, he said, and his voice came out slightly rough. Lena glanced back at him, caught the intensity in his expression, and her color deepened.
I'm suggesting you lease the extraction rights to a managed entity that both packs fund equally. Both alphas retain authority over the system. Neither pack can unilaterally change it without the other's consent. She looked back at the map, but he noticed her hands were slightly unsteady. It solves your problem because it gives you structural control. It solves theirs because it guarantees supply. It's not compromise. It's reframing. That's going to require new legal framework, Marcus said. But he was watching them with an expression that suggested he was reading something he probably shouldn't be reading. Yes, but yeah, that could work. Yes, but yeah, that could work. Julian withdrew his hand, but the moment was marked, known, witnessed. Lena's wolf was pleased about that. His wolf was pleased about that. The knowledge that they'd just declared something in a room full of witnesses, subtle, but real. They spent the next 4 hours refining the framework, debating the details, making sure there were no structural weaknesses. The work was solid. The framework they built was elegant. And every time Lena shifted to reach for a marker or a calculator, Julian found reasons to shift with her, to hand her things, to maintain contact. Small touches, a hand on her shoulder, her hand brushing his as they both reached for the same pen. Each one deliberate, each one noted. Marcus pretended not to see any of it, which was generous considering he had eyes. By the time Marcus reviewed it with fresh eyes the next day, he said it was the cleanest solution he'd seen to a territorial dispute in his 10 years of pack management. More importantly, Julian realized watching Lena present it to the combined packs, they weren't arguing anymore. They were building something, and the something they were building together was stronger than anything either of them could have built alone. What neither of them had stopped to consider was that in pack law, when 2 territories merged under a single alpha's authority, it crossed a threshold. 1 pack made you an alpha, 2 packs made you a king. The old term was alpha king, and it hadn't been invoked in 3 generations, and Julian would have hated it if anyone had thought to mention it. By week 6, they shifted together for the first time since the crisis run, a decision that meant something. Julian's wolf met Lena's wolf in the territory behind the moon petal garden, and there was a moment of pure animal communication, of wolves knowing each other in a way humans couldn't. Finally, Lena's wolf said, "I like him. He's anxious, but he's learning. He tastes like someone who's going to stay now. Also, he has been making sad wolf noises for 3 weeks, and I want that to stop because it's embarrassing for everyone." "Your human is terrifying," Julian's wolf replied. She reorganized the merger database. She actually fixed the irrigation hydrology. She invented a filing taxonomy. She's going to expect things, important things, correctly labeled things. "Good," Lena's wolf said. "He should have someone expecting things. Keeps people honest. Also, between us, my human once reorganized her bookshelf at 3 a.m. because she couldn't sleep. And then she reorganized it again because the first system was alphabetical, but not also sorted by publication date, and I had to physically force her to stop. She needs someone to be a mess around. You're providing a valuable service." They ran hard through the territories, all muscles and instinct, and Julian's wolf realized that this was what he'd been missing. Not the control or the strategy, the absolute presence of being with someone, of moving in sync, of knowing exactly where the other creature was in the darkness. Their bodies moved together with the ease of long practice, even though they'd never run together before. Instinct. Pack instinct. The knowledge that this body next to his was pack, was home, was the only place that mattered. When they shifted back, they were standing in a clearing, breathing hard, covered in dirt and early morning dew. Julian was still catching his breath when Lena started laughing. "Our wolves like each other," she said. She was reaching for her clothes, and Julian caught himself staring, not at her nakedness, though that was there, obvious, beautiful, at the way she moved, at the long line of her spine, the curve of her shoulder, the way the fading marks of exertion mapped across her skin. His wolf wanted to catalog all of it, wanted to know every scar and freckle. "Mine has opinions," Julian said. "All of them accurate." Lena pulled her shirt over her head, and Julian tried not to think about the fact that they were standing alone in a clearing with nobody watching, with all the time in the world to stand closer, to close distance, to do something about the hunger that had been building since week 1. "You're thinking loud," Lena said, and her wolf was close enough to the surface that Julian could see the yellow reflection of eyes under brown ones. "I'm thinking about how I'm going to keep not fucking this up," Julian said honestly, "and simultaneously thinking about how much I want to kiss you right now." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Lena said. She reached out and took his hand, real, deliberate, no hesitation. The warmth of her palm fit against his like something that should have always been there. "Julian, I'm not fragile. I'm not going to break if you stop being perfect. I'm fairly sure I've demonstrated that I'm not perfect." "No, you've demonstrated that you're human and terrified and still showing up anyway. That's the opposite of perfect." Lena squeezed his hand, and the pressure of her fingers anchored him. "My wolf says if you don't kiss me in the next 5 seconds, she's going to file a formal complaint that makes all the previous complaints look like thank you notes. And she wants you to know her complaint system has recently been upgraded.
There's a grading rubric now."
Julian didn't make her wait 5 seconds. He pulled her closer, using the hand he'd been holding to guide her, and kissed her again, slower this time, more certain. She tasted like dirt and morning and the specific flavor of her that he was becoming addicted to. His other hand found her face, cupped it the way he had that morning in the garden, and she made a small sound into the kiss, a sound that undid something in him. Her hands found his shoulders, gripped, pulled him closer. When he finally pulled back, her eyes were still closed, her mouth slightly swollen. "Your wolf rates that?" Julian asked. "She's considering her scoring criteria," Lena replied, eyes still closed. "Current assessment? Significant improvement over the standing and staring era. Room for growth. She's optimistic about future performance reviews." They ran again on Sunday and Friday of week 7. The runs became ritual. Shift, run, shift back, kiss until breathing became optional. Each kiss was different from the last, sometimes desperate, sometimes slow and unhurried. Sometimes her hands would find the back of his neck, fingers threading into his hair, pulling him closer. Sometimes his hands would slip under her shirt, fingers splayed across her lower back, feeling the way she responded to his touch. By week 9, Lena took a day off, which meant something was seriously wrong, because Lena never took days off. Her wolf forced the issue. "You need to run," her wolf said. "You need to shift and not think about water pressure or logistics. You need to just be. Also, you reorganized the cutlery drawer yesterday." "The cutlery drawer, Lena. It was already organized. It's cutlery. It goes in the drawer. Stop it." Lena reluctantly agreed, shifted in her quarters, and ran through the territories in wolf form. 4 hours later, she'd somehow ended up at the moon petal garden, still in shifted form, pacing the perimeter because her wolf had opinions about the space and wanted to claim it. A glow-in-the-dark squirrel appeared during the afternoon, glowing faintly in the late sunlight. Lena shifted back and simply nodded at it, the way you'd acknowledge a coworker you had complicated feelings about, and continued her pacing until she eventually sat on the bench. "That's phase 5, Dimitri's voice called from somewhere in the trees. "Testing territorial awareness patterns. The squirrel is completely harmless. His name is Gerald. He's middle management." "It was in the merger war room yesterday," Lena called back. "It was in the merger war room yesterday," Lena called back. "Yes, Gerald is very ambitious. He's been mapping human spaces. Fascinating data. I'm considering promoting him." "Promoting him to what?" "Promoting him to what?" "Classified," Dimitri said. But the org chart now includes a rodent division, and Gerald is on track for a corner office. He's very focused.
He reminds me of you, actually.
Which is either a compliment or an insult, depending on how you feel about squirrels. He left, and Lena sat alone with her bench and Gerald, and the realization that Julian hadn't shown up in 3 days. He'd been everywhere she was for weeks. This absence was louder. When he finally did show up, he came with his entire team, carrying supplies, ready to work on the garden. Lena watched as they installed new benches, repaired stone paths, cleared fallen branches with focused attention. She stood to help, reaching for a fallen branch at the same time Julian did. Their hands touched, not accidental anymore, not careful. His fingers wrapped around hers on the branch, and for a moment they stood like that, connected. He said this place matters, Sarah from his team told her. He said you sit here, so he wanted it to be better. Lena squeezed his hand before letting go, and she watched him finish the work with the knowledge that he'd organized his entire team around making this place, their place, better. That was the moment she stopped questioning whether he was staying. Julian and Lena ran together every Friday now, always starting with a full shift, the point where human thought gave way to pure instinct, where both wolves could just be without the weight of logistics. His wolf had become, surprisingly, fond of her wolf. They'd bonded over shared exasperation at their human's emotional incompetence, and then over other things, bits of conversation Julian caught in snatches, moments of connection that existed in the space between human and animal. Friday nights were Saturday mornings now. Saturday mornings brought them back to human form and to the moon petal garden. They'd sit on their bench, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her, existing in the space between work and intimacy. The casual touch had become necessary,
The way her hand would find his lap, the way he'd keep her close with an arm across her shoulders, the way their legs would press together in a way that read as ownership. Week 10 brought the second real kiss. Not desperate, not stolen, deliberate. Saturday morning in the garden, the world just beginning to wake up. Lena pulled back from where her head had been resting, turned to face him fully, and kissed him with all the intention in the world. No urgency, just slow, careful thoroughness. She was exploring the shape of his mouth the way she'd explored the merger problems, with complete focus, finding the sensitive spot below his lower lip, the exact angle that made him catch his breath. When she finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard, and her hand was tangled in his shirt. "I love you," Lena said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact she was presenting to him the way she presented all facts, clearly, with no room for misunderstanding. "This is happening. I'm not doing the thing where I hide it or organize it into submission. I tried organizing it. I made a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet made it worse. I love you. So you need to figure out if that's something you can actually handle, or if you're going to run again." Julian couldn't breathe properly. The words hit him like something physical, not a blow, but a settling, a rightness that undid him. "I love you," he said back. "I have been in love with you since you told me I was wrong about the housing complex, and it's terrified me every single day since. But I don't want to run anymore. I want to stay." She kissed him again, and it was different this time, tinged with victory, with the knowledge that they'd finally said the real thing, had finally named it. By week 13, they'd stopped pretending they weren't sleeping in the same quarters. The merger work was winding down. The packs were integrated. And Julian and Lena existed in a state of quiet contentment that made everyone around them slightly nauseous. "You're disgusting," Dmitri told them, appearing with a squirrel that was not glowing, which apparently signified the end of Phase 6. "Both of you. You keep looking at each other in meetings like you're having entire conversations with your eyes, and I'm being forced to witness it as a bystander with no emotional support. Also, I did some research. 2 packs merged under 1 alpha crosses the old council threshold. You're technically an alpha king now."
He said this the way someone might say you have spinach in your teeth. Very historic, very prestigious. I'm sure the title will look excellent on your emotional support spreadsheets. Gerald has noticed. Gerald is uncomfortable. Phase 6 is now complete. All squirrels have been successfully territorialized. Gerald has been promoted to Senior Director of Rodent Operations. I will now be moving on to new projects, possibly involving small mammals and existential crises. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Gerald isn't real, Lena said mildly. And stop calling him Alpha King. His ego doesn't need the exercise. His ego is the least exercised part of him, Dmitri replied. The man spent 4 weeks unable to form sentences in your presence. He's the least kingly king in recorded history, and I say that with genuine affection and significant judgment. Adjust your contingency plans accordingly. On the 7th Saturday morning of the official merger, week 14, 3 months into the slow siege of 2 packs learning to be one, Lena was already there when Julian arrived. She had 2 cups of tea. She was sitting on their bench. But this time she was sitting in the middle of it. There was no 3 feet of space anymore. Just the space she'd left for him, which was significantly smaller. Julian sat down, and when she leaned her head on his shoulder, the distance became nothing at all. They didn't talk for a while. The garden smelled like stone and growing things and the particular green of late spring. Somewhere in the merger territories, someone was shouting about a structural issue. The merger was winding down, moving toward operational stability. Dmitri was probably gleefully engineering a solution involving Gerald and something unnecessarily complex. The packs were learning each other in the careful way that pack animals do. Territories becoming less distinct, hierarchies becoming less rigid. But in this moment, there was just quiet. The kind of quiet that meant something. That meant they'd learned how to exist together without filling the space with words. Julian's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together. Her pulse was steady under his fingers now, no longer the racing thing it had been. She was calm here, with him. Home. I want to tell you something, Lena said eventually. And I want you to let me finish before you have a crisis about it. Julian, who had mostly stopped having crises, nodded. My wolf says you're permanent now. Not magically, fated bond permanent, which, thank gods, because that would be weird, and I would have to file so much paperwork. But actually permanent. The kind where she's decided you're pack, and she's going to bite anyone who suggests otherwise. And she's already claimed the left side of the bench, because apparently that's how wolves work. Lena paused, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. I'm giving you the option to leave before this becomes a thing you can't unwind. Is her wolf serious? Julian asked. Is her wolf serious? Julian asked. Extremely serious. She's been planning her bite strategy for approximately 6 hours. She has a flowchart. She's also mentioned several times that if you fuck this up, she's filing a formal complaint that makes the squirrel grievance look like a love letter. She wants you to know the complaint has been pre-written. It's 12 pages. It has an executive summary. His wolf made a sound of pure pleasure and anticipation. I'm not leaving, Julian said. He lifted her hand, brought it to his mouth, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. I'm done leaving. I'm exactly where I want to be. Lena's breath caught at the gesture, and she turned toward him fully, cupping his face in her hands the way he'd cupped hers in the garden that first time. She kissed him slowly, thoroughly, with all the certainty of someone who'd made a decision and was staying with it. When she pulled back, her forehead rested against his. Good, Lena said, because I'm not good at pretending things don't matter to me. I'm good at organizing them, managing them, optimizing them, but I'm not good at pretending, and I've been pretending for long enough. They sat like that as the garden woke up, as people started appearing on the merger territories, as the whole complicated machinery of 2 packs becoming one continued its slow, difficult work. The bench had become theirs. The garden had become theirs. and somewhere under the surface, two wolves settled in for the long haul, satisfied that their humans had finally figured out the simplest thing of all, that the safest place to be was with someone who knew exactly how broken you were and decided to stay anyway. The merger was supposed to take 6 months. It took 14 weeks. By the end, the Ridgeback Pack and the Black Fang Pack weren't two entities anymore. They were one.
And Julian Thorne and Lena Petrova, who had been forced to work together out of necessity, had somehow become necessary to each other in a way that had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with the specific alchemy of two people choosing each other every single day. The Alpha King title was technically accurate, historically significant, and Julian hated it with every fiber of his being, which naturally meant Dmitri used it at every available opportunity and had already ordered business cards. In the space between crisis and calm, in the garden where 3 feet of distance had become none, and staying had become the only choice that made sense,